on kind of another tangent, you had mentioned earlier how a lot of the point of FROs is to try and find a place to make a better world, and try and get make sure that funding is going to places that are able to better people's lives. And you had also mentioned at one point when you were talking about biosecurity, kind of these long tails of existential risk. And I know both of these projects aren't necessarily directly connected to something like an existential risk. How do you guys feel about a lot of projects that are out to prevent existential risk? I mean, AI is always a hot topic to talk about, it as well as biosecurity. And so is this something an FRO is probably going to go into a direction for?
On AI in particular, I think that there are many organizations that are working on this, and it's like very well funded and very well, like that the space of what AI safety looks like is fairly well tiled. So I think that we want to be additive, and so unless there's something like very specific that comes up, it's unlikely that we'll work in that space because other people are doing a lot of really excellent work there. I do think in general, I am fairly bought into like effective altruist causes and into preventing existential risk. And there's a lot of road mapping to be done about what specific technology we could differentially develop that would help prevent existential risk. At the same time, choosing not to develop things that could be potentially harmful. So I definitely think that this is a direction that we'd be very willing to go. I do think, though, that like it is not the only thing we're interested in doing. I think it is like one of several things we're interested in working on. I think there's also just like it is hard to quantify how mental health is a risk or is a suffering that is in the US and internationally. And so working in spaces like that on either neuroscience or other interventions for mental health is really interesting. I think that there's a lot of like fundamental things, like the cultivarium is a really good example where like this project could be really useful for medicine. It could be really useful for industrial applications. It could be really useful for climate change. So one of those is an existential risk, potentially like long tail climate change could destroy humanity. And so this project is a very early building block in responding to that.
Yeah, there are a number of things that make this quite hard. So, I mean, one thing that I will say is that there's a lot of science kind of funding entities that will just basically say any new knowledge in any context is good. Science is just always good. And we don't subscribe to that. We actually think that there could be, as was the case with nuclear weapons or what have you, there could be technologies developed that within a certain context in a certain time would be sort of net negative from an X-risk perspective. So that we think that that's possible. And we also think there's possible that there's some technologies that would be sort of robustly net positive from an X-risk perspective, with caveats in exactly how the information is used and so on. And then there's a lot of kind of gray area or area where we're kind of leaning on the side of the knowledge is probably good, not only because it would create economic growth of various kinds, but it could improve our toolkit for even understanding what X-risks are. So for example, like the brain mapping project, will it differentially accelerate AI or AI safety? I could make arguments that it would differentially accelerate AI safety given the state of knowledge where we are now. We have learning algorithms that seem to work pretty well, but we don't really know what training signals to train them with or how to align them. And a lot of the long-range circuitry, like you were mentioning, how the amygdala trains, another part of the brain, or how the basal ganglia trains the cortex, or these other things that, that might be differentially on the sort of safety or alignment side. But it's very hard to know that for sure. And it may be the AI isn't even that close to the brain, so it might be just kind of very neutral or something. And then there's the problem that there are multiple X-risks of different kinds. So like getting off the planet is probably good for many kinds of X-risks, but if you do that by accelerating biotechnology so much that people create bioweapons, that's bad. A lot of biotech could be useful for climate or health or other things, some of which is X-risk, and then some of that could be bad. And so navigating that is tough, but that's part of why we want to have just a deliberate approach to it. We want to fund other kinds of road mapping and understanding this stuff, and not just kind of just go around and just do stuff because it sounds cool or something. Yeah.
That's interesting you say that, because we spoke to Kevin Esfeld just before the pandemic started, actually. And he was talking specifically, obviously, he's big into existential risk. And I think he said something along the lines of, I don't want to completely quote him because I don't want to misquote him by mistake, but it was something along the lines that he felt that if it was up to him, viral research would be stopped because he thinks that it's too much of an existential risk compared to what could possibly come out of that. Which to me I thought was crazy, because I mean you have so many viral vectors, so many gene therapies that are all relying on these viral researches. But he felt, and I mean he's much more an expert in it than I am, of course, that it was, the risk was so high that it was something that if it was up to him, he would just have it stopped. So I think it's very interesting to kind of look into these different existential risks. Similarly, you have Max Tegmark, who's a big name in AI, who now has the Future of Life Institute and is one of the leaders of the Future of Life Institute, specifically trying to mitigate dangerous AIs in kind of a unobvious way, and kind of making sure that we understand AI more than just kind of like saying no more AI.